Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Dickerhuff. So glad that you're tuning in and thankful to spend a little bit of time with you today. Wherever you chose to listen to this or watch on YouTube, I'm grateful and I'm excited to share this conversation with Susan Freeman. Let me first share a little bit about this. Resilience. It's a key attribute to embracing change and developing an inner strength to overcome any of life's challenges. But are we doing our best to harness the inner strength of resilience and work to enhance mindfulness in our everyday lives? For many leaders, that answer is no. It often gets put on the list of, yeah, that's important to do. But without a functional system, it starts and stops worse than a brand new driver trying to drive a manual transmission car. You know, the one with the gear shift, you have the clutch and all. It's just a hot mess. My guest this week, Susan Freeman, was forced to address those very challenges, the functional routine of mindfulness as a mother, as a support, as a now coach, transformational coach, leadership coach. She had to deal with her own challenges. For her, that was the chronic pain after healing from a fractured foot. A foot that was fractured when she was at the grocery store and at the store dropped a scale on her foot. So that's a dynamic explanation, description of something that really regards mindfulness. Where did she go? She went to yoga. Amazingly enough, and my personal experience with yoga, I have practiced yoga at times. Am I a yogi? Nope, no way, I'm not. But yet, it just absolutely has impacted my life. The most flexible it fit, the fastest I've ever been in my life was in my 30s when I was doing yoga once a week for an hour. And at times when I've done it, my local studio, Power Eclipse, helps me. And yet, I don't do it enough. Why? It's not a part of my routine. Now, why do I share that? Because that is the barrier for so many leaders to develop and build mindfulness, to deal with everything that's coming their way. The stresses of leading is having that functional plan. Well, I'm excited to share this conversation with Susan. She shares her functional system that she wrote about in the book, Inner Switch. We talk about this. Thankful for this book, 7 Timeless Principles to Transform Modern Leadership. I surely hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I'll catch you at the end. We'll wrap it up, go from there. Susan, thank you so much for joining me. I just want to say this. One of the great joys of having this platform, doing this, is people like yourself that I get to know, interact with. I am so excited to have this conversation. One, because I see so much alignment, but as well, it's fun for me to find a different voice that I didn't know you before this, and yet the ability to create a friendship, a relationship, and support each other, I'm most excited for. So Susan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to co-create and collaborate with you. Love the work you're doing in the world.
Yeah, so you've been you've been in leadership, you've been in helping other leaders now for many years. You're a leader as a mother, as a wife. Really kind of the first step that I want to jump in here to as a new author, writing your book, The Inner Switch, and as well discussing that, I want to just I want you to go back to a time where life wasn't as clear as what it is now. And if you were to look back at your younger self and say, man, if I could give this to you to help you so much, what conversation would you have with her?
Oh, what a great question. That is a fabulous question. Okay. I think I would say learn to create space for what really matters, which is to be quiet, to become present with oneself so that I could become more present with everyone with whom I was in a relationship with, versus the more reactive me that was going from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing and just kind of doing the list and checking the boxes and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that the experience of life now is entirely different because of that shift in perspective, that switch.
Hmm.
And I try my very best to stay in that zone as much as I possibly am able to.
There's a piece there that it seems very counterintuitive. I think back, my kids are younger than yours. They're teenagers now, but the movie that came out, Cars, it's been, several years ago now. And there was a point in there where the animated character, the car, was racing. And the guide for him as a racer was like, you have to slow down to go faster.
Yes.
And that's really, again, what I gathered there. It's so often it's hard, especially for people that are achievement driven or leaders or people that a lot is expected and required of them, parents that are still professionals and everything else, is take time for you so
Yes.
you can actually be more when you're with everyone else. And it doesn't, our brain tells us sometimes something different unless we focus and say, no, you're lying to me. I can't keep doing more and expecting to get more. I have to, really just kind of slow down to get the most.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. I often tell my clients that very thing. So sometimes we're going to need to slow down in order to go fast. And it's
Yeah.
very counterintuitive, particularly for people at the senior most levels.
Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
used to running at, 150 miles an hour all the time and crushing it, putting in exhaustively
Yeah.
long work weeks. Many of them are already developing health problems or already have developed them. And then there's a lot of other habits that we have to work on relinquishing
Yeah.
because of what is required in order to cope with that type of,
Sure.
punishment of oneself. So I think that is just such wise information. And I think we're seeing actually a real generational shift. I mean, I
Yeah.
think, I know you said your kids are younger, but with the generations that are coming after us, the millennials, Gen Z, they
Yeah.
are they are saying no to that. And they're
Well,
basically voting with their feet and saying, we're not going to live
yeah.
like that. We're not going to show up like that. We're going to do it differently. We're going to do it our
Yeah.
way. And we're going to be okay with wherever that,
Yeah.
that axe falls, because nothing is worth destroying our energy for in terms of achievement or financial success or anything else. Whereas I think the people of our generation, we were willing to do that to
Hmm.
ourselves. We
Totally.
were primed and reinforced and promoted based on the degree to which we could show up like that in the world. And I think
Totally.
we're in a sea change shift, Tyler, right now, where we're going from this old world order to
Yep.
a completely different order. And everyone's kind of disoriented, going, well, what's happening here?
Yeah. Oh,
No.
entirely. I mean, you're now probably the fourth or fifth podcast where that's been brought up. And not by direction, but just that's the reality in the world that I see that you're working in. That I think if we're willing to recognize what through the pandemic ushered in a new generation of workers, two, it also gave a lot of people time to pause and say, whoa, what really is important now in this season that I see when I talk to other leaders when having these conversations is we're actually in that massive sea change because we have the generation that are Gen X and older, that are saying, no, it has to go back to this because that's what we had to be. That's what made us successful. And yet the younger generations, the workers that are maybe more frontline aren't leading, or they're bringing up, creating, are more of the workforce are saying, no, that doesn't matter to me. So I'm going to go to the companies that meet that. And if you want to lead in that way, well, that's fine. But you're not going to have people that work for you because we have a choice. All right. In the middle of this conversation, I just want to take a moment to invite you, if you're not a subscriber to the Impact Driven Leader newsletter, to go to the Impact Driven Leader /free course. You're going to get the 4 days to maximum impact video series as well. Submit you into my email sphere where you can learn more about the Impact Driven Leader community. So now back to the rest of the episodes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there's
Yeah.
so much dissension right now over that conversation,
Yeah.
because the default from the boomer leaders is get yourselves back into the office so we can go back to the way it was in 2019. And
Totally.
everybody has had this taste of a completely different life and saying, wait a minute, that was actually pretty interesting, parts of it. And I learned
Totally.
a lot about myself, and I learned about what makes me happy, and I learned how I do my best work, and I learned about how I can take better care of my family while I'm working, and I learned how I can take better care of my body. And so all of this is being now dealt with.
Yeah.
And I think that my book is really an invitation to look
Yeah.
at. So if you wanted a roadmap
Yeah.
of how to engage differently, where would you start?
Well, I think what's awesome here is, you know, I'm a person that my wife she's gone, does yoga, is yoga certified and holy yoga. I've enjoyed yoga. I enjoy yoga, but I've never thought about it in the context that you laid out in the book, which I think is great. I love to think in abstracts and then bring it into reality. Like I look at sports, I look at other industries to bring it into my world because you see it in a different frame. And so for you laying it out in your book, Inner Switch, how you've used yoga and then looking at your experience and dealing through your life, you know, just ups and downs and the roller coaster's life to say, oh, I can actually enjoy this ride instead of holding on with a death grip and just, am I going to get off this thing and be in all one piece? I think that lesson and the roadmap, as you say, is so powerful that I don't think people would necessarily think of, but it's still very, very clear.
Yeah. What is it about that struck you?
Well, I think, you know, I mentioned this as we were just getting started, as we, you know, introducing each other, the idea of presence. My word for the year is be. And I think, you know, I shared another friend has that same word, and we are kind of engaging, interacting. He's like, trying to figure out what this word means. Understand it's very, very important. But what does being mean? And that's where, you know, taking the idea of yoga and you're going to go sit in a room, probably with the lights turned down, maybe the heat turned up, and you have to just focus on that. Your phone somewhere else. You're not getting notifications. You're just there in that space. And then learning to, as I've learned to in yoga, breathe. And, you know, how do you deal with tightness? I can be tight, right? I can have moments where I get to my edge. And what did I learn? Oh, I just have to breathe through it and just relax and understand I'm not going to break. And if I need to, you know, relax for a second to go back into that position, I can do that. And the other piece that I've realized, and this is just me, my human nature, the most, I would say the most fit, not necessarily the most well-conditioned I've been, but the ability to do things well has happened when I was doing yoga. Because I ended up just, I released some of the tension. I was a little bit more flexible. And again, as I think about those and I experience those things, and as you layer your experience with yoga, and I didn't take anything from your book as far as like, oh, okay, and you kind of isolate it. It's not the religion, it's not the whatever of yoga, but say, hey, here's the practice, here's the ancient history of what yoga is. And if we actually apply that to our life, man, it can be extremely beneficial as well.
Yes, indeed. Very well said. The idea of going to one's edge, the yoga mat is a practice field for becoming aware of the tension that we carry in our physical bodies, which is what the postures are about. The postures are about entering physical practices that will push our body into areas where we may experience strong sensation, discomfort. That's called going to the edge. And what you so beautifully talked about is being able to utilize that experience to tune into what is happening right now. I'm noticing that I'm having strong sensation. Otherwise, it's hurting, right?
Yeah.
There may be a point where you'll go beyond your edge and you will hurt so much that you could become injured, which is why a good yoga teacher will always say, don't go beyond where you just feel strong sensation, but not pain.
Yeah.
The idea is that you experience that sensation and you separate the sensation you experience from the story you make up about the experience.
Entirely,
So
yes.
that's what's the key. The key is you're going to experience the sensation, and can you become an observer of the sensations without the story? Because
Yeah.
when you can do that, guess what? Now you've become present. Now
Yeah.
you're able to take that experience of discomfort and put it into any situation in life. And then your work and your life become your
Yeah.
yoga mat.
Well, and I think that's we talk about the physical presence of your body, but when you translate that into the emotional and the relational situations of your life, it's not misaligned. It's not different. It's not from a different stratosphere. It's all connected. And I think about, interactions with people, and you're like, okay, why is this making me feel weird? One of the pieces that I talk about in the community that has affected me, you bring up it numerous times, are fears and insecurities. And as I've seen that those edges are where our fears and insecurities are telling us things. I have it described as barriers in our leadership.
Yes.
Those fears and insecurities are barriers. It's really, you've aligned kind of, describe it much the same way. And it's like, how can we see that? I describe it, as I've told other people, is I start, looking at, how do I take bricks out of that wall? It's probably going to be there. But at the same point, how can I take bricks out of that wall so I can either move through it, pass through it, see through it, where it doesn't hold me back? I understand it's there, but it doesn't hold me back. And I think that's what I gather from the framework that you've put together in becoming present, saying, understand, where's the discomfort? How can I recognize it? How can I see the situation for what it is? I'm not going to put a story on it. I'm just going to understand it. And then how can I move forward from that? And I think as a perspective, as leadership, what I picked up in your book as well is when you can do that finally is the only time you'll be able to actually connect with people and lead. And
Yes.
if not, it's all a fallacy. It's all just, well, we're trying to get through it, but I don't really know. And we hear so much about the imposter syndrome, right? And I think that's kind of what you're identifying for so many people.
Yeah, if you can't experience your own presence within and be connected within yourself, how are you going to connect with others?
Yeah.
And if you can't connect with others, how can you influence them and lead them? And if you can't influence and lead them, how are we going to solve the pressing problems of our society and our world and our planet? We can't, right? So I believe that this is so fundamental to our being able to have impact that is sustainable and that can take people from where they are to an entirely different level of experience, because so few people right now actually are able to be present and
Yes.
to be in conversation with others in a present way.
Yeah.
And we know it when we have it. So the work that I do in the world as an executive coach is literally all about presence. Executive coaching is the pinnacle of being able to sustain and develop trust, connection, and presence so that the other person is feeling completely heard, understood, and invited to shatter their belief structures about whatever it is that they have gotten stuck with.
Yeah.
Right? You can't influence a person in any other way. Otherwise, you're telling them what to do, you're giving them advice, none of which are going to last or be appreciated because they're not going to come from inside of them. It's not going to come from inside of them.
I think what, kind of the other piece of that, and like you said, I mean, you can manipulate, you can, persuade people to do something.
Yeah.
But what I think that the great difference there, and we've seen that happen in the past in our society, and we talked about this changing of tides where the sea is churning now. And for older generations, it was very much that. It was the authoritarian. It was the, I'm going to tell you what to do. You're going to do it. And now we as a society realize that, so many people are like, I have more options. I don't have to. I'm entitled to more, not from an entitlement point of view, but I have agency over my life. I don't have to put myself in such a negative relationship. I can actually have some free will. I can engage in it or not. And I think now that forces what you just brought up as a requirement in your relationship working with people, that should not be viewed differently from myself as a leader working with anyone else. I have to have that presence. I have to understand who they are as a person, what they're going through, what their pain points are, what discomfort they're trying to navigate and feel through. And if we can have that conversation, then we can go somewhere together, and their opportunity to go beyond that then happens because of that.
Yes. Yes. Very well said.
So
Absolutely.
for those that obviously haven't maybe read the book yet, which just came out, where did this start for you? I'd love for you, to say, all right, where did this aha moment come for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I talk about this in the preface of the book, but it came about as an organic response to a really powerful discovery in the journey of healing my own body. I have been thinking deeply about yogic concepts for over a decade and how this all came about. But like many things that happen, you said it kind of struck you. It was quite serendipitous. I had 23 years ago, a scale in a grocery store fell on my foot, and I broke I broke one of my, not a toe, but a bone in my foot, a bone in my foot. And I developed severe burning pain. And as a result of this, I had developed what's called complex regional pain syndrome. And it was sort of a malfunctioning of the nervous system. What makes this important is that I did not understand at the time that our bodies are governed by two parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And what happened is, with the pain syndrome that I developed, is when my foot healed physically, my sympathetic nervous system continued to misfire. So it sent these signals to my foot as if I still had just had the injury. So I had this horrific burning pain in my foot that was horrible and excruciating. And I went to many, many, many physicians and healers and people to get relief. And they did everything they could, but the Western medical model basically had not much to offer me. And I knew I had to figure it out on my own. But at this point, I was working as an executive coach, and I was helping people grow and succeed as senior level leaders. And I had had a yoga practice. And so I knew that one of the most important parts about yoga was learning to use the body to get into the poses. But what we don't always appreciate is that yoga is also a system of using the poses to get into the body. And we just talked about that. When things become uncomfortable on the mat, no matter how intense they are, we can become an observer. So what I started thinking about is, I wonder if I could learn what I used on the yoga mat and become an observer of my pain. And so I wanted to learn how to detach from the experience of the pain, the story I made about the pain, etc., so that I could better cope with it. And I had learned to become really the witness of my pain over a period of years. And I used this experience to discover that I was not the discomfort. I was the witness of the discomfort. And I was separate from the discomfort. And that was the game changer. So the pain didn't disappear, but over a period of time, I began studying yogic philosophy and I continued my practice. And what I learned is that when I could activate my parasympathetic nervous system in yoga, I could mediate the impact that the pain was having on my body. And after 7 years, I was able to return to walking, hiking, even ballroom dancing, things I could have never imagined after my initial injury. And I was surprised and, of course, relieved. And I realized I had discovered a true miracle. So at that time, I'd been working as an executive coach, and I didn't anticipate that those two paths would actually begin to merge. So what I started doing is listening to my clients, because in my traditional coach training, of course, none of this had ever applied or had been systematized. But I began hearing people differently, and I became curious about what they were suffering with. And I started learning how the discomfort that my clients were experiencing could parallel some of the things that I had been learning on the yoga mat. So early on, I started being able to ask them questions because I had trust and I got permission to try these experiments in some of my early sessions. And so they would routinely express things to me like, I'm having a difficult business decision. I have this challenging conversation. I have a conflicted relationship. I have overwhelm. I have chronic stress, everything. So I started to summon up my own courage and say, can we try something?
Yeah.
And what I discovered was that little by little, the clients were not only enjoying what they were learning from these experiments, they were actually calling me and requesting them from all over.
Yeah.
So I began to refine my hypothesis and my understanding into the realm of business. And the book really offers this practical, linear, sequential Western model that is understandable to people who've never been on a yoga mat. And it was written for people who may never go on a yoga mat.
Yeah.
It's not a requirement. Now, that what I want to say is that those who do go on yoga mats will experience a much, much deeper and quicker journey than those who don't. And I've written the book with lots of practices and exercises for folks to try to get a lot of value without going on the mat themselves.
I think really the great impetus of that is, if it's yoga, phenomenal. If it is something where you meditate, something to force yourself to slow down. And slow down, and then use all of the tools of going through yoga to deal with the discomfort, to be in this situation, to understand and make that mind-body connection. And again, when we look at that from any type of leadership or executive role, life role, when you're serving others in some capacity, you're going to be faced with it. And it's, how do you deal with it? Do you manifest it to the point where yourself, and again, that pain was a manifestation of, your nervous system telling you, hey, there's pain here. But obviously the difficulty was, they're like, well, we can't pinpoint anything, right? And so it's like you had to get over that, figure it out on your own. And I think that's what's so damaging in relationships.
Yes.
Relationships just between spouses, relationships between parents and children, relationships in the workplace is, I don't think we take the time to separate past from current. And you describe this in the book. It's, let go of those stories and just read the situation for what it is. And that's part of presence and being there. And maybe the past could, have some reverence here, but likely not. And so instead of saying, well, it's going to be, you say, all right, well, let me just observe the entire situation. Let me ask some questions here. And one of the things that I've learned, and I imagine you see this with your clients, the leaders who do the best at asking questions are probably the most present. They're,
Absolutely.
the most relieved
to ask good questions.
Yeah, they're relieved.
Yeah.
And they also come to better solutions instead of thinking, I need to be the rainmaker that makes everything happen.
Yes. It's not about you. It's about other people joining in and being invited to put in their best collaborative selves, which they can only do if they feel invited, if they feel trust, if they feel safe. There has to be psychological safety.
Yeah.
So all of those components have to be part of this conversation. And I wanted to just reference something that you said earlier about, sort of being present. This idea, in the third chapter of the book, Letting Go, which is really sort of the pivotal chapter where things start to sort of take off for many people, is really about the reactive part of us and how our brains and bodies have accumulated these blocks over our life history. And these blockages are completely subconscious. We have no awareness of them. They're stored in our brains and bodies as memories. And when something that's happening in the present moment actually reminds us of something that happened in a previous instance, what happens is we start to have a sensation in our body. That usually the bodily sensations will come first, or possibly at the same time as the emotions. And then we're off into what we often call an amygdala hijack, which means we have actually left, because now we have been hijacked by the amygdala and we're in a reactive mode. We cannot consciously respond and we are not present. So letting go refers to any process that helps us release the binds that keep us tied to these reactive patterns from the past. So from a yogic perspective, when we are on the mat, we are experiencing that discomfort and we're in this moment, not in all the other moments in our lives when we experienced pain and discomfort. We are just in this moment. So the more times we can have this experience of being in our bodies and experiencing the discomfort now and not making up a story about it hurt last week, it hurt yesterday, 15 years ago, I got really hurt doing something, right? That is going to provoke more reactive thinking. Now, from a leadership perspective, what often happens is, you're in a meeting and you're in a meeting with a lot of other people. Things are going really well. There's a terrific conversation going on. And then someone says something and another person reacts. And everybody's sitting around the table going, what just happened? We were just doing great. And now there's tension. There's voices are raised. People are starting to get physically tense. Right? What's happened? Someone has just become triggered. So someone said something that pushed a button of another person in that room, not having any knowledge that that person had a button. And now here we are in a conflict. So how are we going to get out of that? We're not going to want to stay in a conflicted conversation because no good is going to come of it.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to back up and we have to center ourselves first, because the only person we can control is us. Never, ever, ever can we control another person. So what I often share with clients is when you back it up and you ground yourself and you become physically and emotionally and mentally aware of where you are right now and become curious. Oh, isn't this interesting? I notice something is happening right now and we are having a reaction. Just that, and letting out a deep exhale can start to clear it and allow your brain and body and emotional state to begin to recalibrate and make a different choice. Yeah. And without doing that, things will deteriorate quite rapidly.
Yeah. I think the piece there that I've also think about is when you do that for yourself, and then you go through that process and you start looking around and observing others, and you can quickly say, okay, how do I diffuse this? There's a leadership adage that I've heard that you either bring a bucket of gasoline or a bucket of water. In that moment, I am, presently, to kind of play this out, I'm present. All right, I know in my left, I have a bucket of water. In my right, I have a bucket of gasoline. Now, I have those buckets. I have that control of myself. Am I going to just throw a bucket because I'm not sure? Or am I going to say, no, I'm going to put water on this. I'm going to do things that, just kind of like help bring everyone else because I'm there and I can help encourage and influence that. And the more that I create that state of awareness or comfort within the discomfort, to be that lighthouse in the storm per se, I think what I've heard from you and I've seen myself, man, it's pretty impactful. Because then everyone else can almost does that themselves if they're not trained that way. And you can start moving towards that resolution, that lack of conflict place where you can almost start having that discussion when seconds ago it seemed like it was going to be an all-out war.
Yeah, very well said. It's really this idea of, be the change that you wish to see. Don't wait for someone else to do it. Clear your own energy first before you speak. And note that you always have a choice. You always have a choice. What you do with that moment, your first reaction is free. What you do with the moment after the reaction is what's interesting.
Yeah. One thing that, we've talked about here now is really taking the time to integrate either the principles themselves of yoga or actual yoga itself into your life. So those that you work with, and so many people that come to you, it's like, oh, that's great, Susan. I don't have time for that. Right? What do you say to them? How do you encourage them?
I never tell anybody what to do. So it has to come from inside of them. So what I do is I will introduce some of the types of exercises and practices in the book to just give them a taste and
There you
allow
go.
them to have an experience in their office chair, an experience in their home chairs, an experience before they go to bed at night, giving them lots of different ways to access information. And if they become curious, and some of them do, they will say, I think I would really like to try yoga. Then I will suggest, here's what I would invite you to look for and consider when choosing a type of studio and a type of teacher, right?
Yeah.
These are the things that I would consider to be important.
Yeah.
But as I said, many of my clients will not actually get on mats, and I wouldn't ask them to do so. I have been able to teach these principles and all of the case histories in the book with people, most of whom have never been on a mat.
Yeah. Yeah. The lesson there is, I think, start small. Start small.
Yeah. Big changes come from intentionality to create a shift.
Yes.
And the inner switch is not something that will happen after reading this book. I can assure you of that. I have been working on this path for over 25 years. So you're not going to create an inner switch just by reading. An inner switch is requiring an embodied, consistent practice. And it will happen if you intend for it to happen. If you decide that it's important enough for you and you take the small baby steps day in and day out with consistency and self-compassion, the inner switch will take place. There's no other way.
Yeah. And I think, going back to, not that it needs to be the way of the future and not to, confuse that, but the idea that as a society, we're because of so much, confusion and distraction, and you talk about detachment within the book, we're all asking for more people to be present.
Yeah.
And the only way to be present is to find a way to take all those other things that don't really matter in this moment and shut them off.
Yeah.
And, you make a comment, which I fully agree that, presence is what's demanded of leaders. You write it as presence is the most valuable leadership gift we have to offer.
Yeah.
I believe that entirely true. And then, you go on to say and share that, it's the integration of all this. It's the integration of our presence with others, the connectedness that actually helps us lead. And I think that's what a generation is asking for, is instead of being in, the corner office where I just am told something, I want to know. It comes back to that trust piece that you shared. And, I've been this. You go into a yoga studio, you go into any environment and you're like, I'm not really sure. I'm not really comfortable. The first time may be awkward. But if you're willing to go back into it, and if there is that trust that was developed, say, hey, just come as you are. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a master at this. I think if you can apply those philosophies in leadership, man, people are going to achieve way more.
Yeah. So beautifully said, really. I completely concur with you, and I think we're aligned. I mean, the world is begging for us to find new ways. And so I believe that the system that I'm sharing is a way to help people learn that all the stuff that you say and do and offer them is not going to land if you haven't developed the capacity to hold space for presence and for real listening, for asking great questions, and for sharing what is really important in the conversation, which is that the connection be maintained. No matter what, we don't want to leave a conversation with a disconnect, right? Even if we don't get what we wanted, even if the other person doesn't get what they wanted, that's okay. We can disagree.
Yes.
But what's really important is that we maintain that human connection, which comes from, I see you, I hear you, and we may not in this moment find a way to agree or come together, and that's okay. We're going to keep talking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think from that, then actual beneficial decisions can be made to say, oh, do we further walk together? Or do we decide that, hey, we need to walk apart, but it's made in a manner that is healthy and productive for each, instead of at a tension point.
Yes.
Well, they're not with me, so I have to walk away. You talk about that in regards to balance. And I think, almost layering into that polarity. You say, hey, I have to appreciate, a magnet. It has two poles. They're complete opposites. You put them together, but a magnet in of itself is whole. And I kind of view that polarity concept is you can have that as long as you're not opposing each other, as long as you're not trying to, really attack each other. Man, it's very beneficial to have some of that polarity, because I think through this presence, it's only when you're aware of that, can you have true awareness. Meaning, if I'm so fixated, it has to be this way, I can't see any other way, well, then that's not awareness.
Well,
but if you understand,
that's not presence, because
totally,
you're not open to what is happening and unfolding in front of you. You've already made the decision that you have the cards, that you're right, and you're the one that needs to be followed. So there's no space, and we started our conversation talking about this, there's no space for other people to walk into that circle. It's about me. I want this. I'm going to get this. Not,
and I'll do whatever to get it.
Right. I'll do whatever to get it. Not that I have this vision. What is your vision? What's important to you? Where do you want to go?
Yeah.
How could we work together to make this possible? What can you do? What can I do? What can we do? Right. Now you're moving forward collaboratively and co-creatively. The other way is, comes from, reactivity. And so that isn't going to get the results. And I think that's what so many people in the world today of work are saying, we're just done with this reactivity stuff. We're done with this directive style. We're done with being told this is how it's going to be and this is how we're going to be, because it doesn't resonate with us. And by the way, it's making us sick anyway. So we're just done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that this, the times that we are living in, I think the pandemic really accelerated. I think we were headed there, but the pandemic just gave us a chance to have a clean moment to say, we're going to all hit the pause button for a period of years, and we're going to get to experience a completely different way of working. And we'll see. And there are many of us who made such permanent, lasting shifts during that time period. Not only do we not want to go back, not only do we not want to repeat it, we don't want to go back, and we never want to go back. And then we look with curiosity at the people who say, well, let's just get back to the way it was. And we're like, why would we want to do that? Yeah. That was what so broken. That was so broken.
Well, and I think, the one word that you shared there that I hung on is directiveness with connection and collaboration is absolutely required. Directiveness is, this is my way. There is no other way. There's no collectiveness. You come to my path will not work.
Yeah.
But the directiveness to say, hey, okay, can we both align to this? Yes, we're both aligned. Great. That's where we're going to go. And I think that is such a clarity of vision that is required, because if you don't have that clarity of vision and that directiveness, people are still lost. And so I think it just, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that one of the biggest challenges that I see in people, even people who lead at the very highest levels, is they're very clear within their own minds of where they're headed. There's usually never a concern. What I do see, however, is that they have difficulty ensuring that everyone else has the clarity that they have. Yeah. So I often will say to them, when we start working together, we need to begin at the very beginning, which is building the blocks of getting alignment. And alignment means you got to get everything out of your head onto the template, the piece of paper that I'm going to give you today to dump it. And what I've seen is that many, many people really struggle with being clear when they have to articulate in writing, what is the vision? What is it that we stand for? What are our key values? What are the most important 3 things we have to accomplish in the next 6 months? And because they can't articulate it and they haven't communicated it and had it embraced, everyone below them and around them is scrambling, trying to figure out what is it that they really do want.
Totally.
And so from a strategic perspective, we have to match what it is that we're doing with our inner work with what needs to happen organizationally and from a team alignment perspective. And those conversations cannot take place in an environment where there is not this level of collaborative, co-creative communication, integration, and presence.
Yeah. And that all comes through clarity. And that clarity has to be in a community that embraces that. And the only way to embrace that is to be curious and want it. And that's going to bring clarity. But if we're afraid and we choose ambiguity, then it's going to be continued confusion. And clarity is healthy. And especially when you allow people to say, hey, that doesn't fit for me. Okay, no problem. Great. That's okay. I'd rather that than me try to just be ambiguous and hope you stay, but then you're really not sure why you're here. I think that comes back to a lot of you could be on a yoga mat and you could be kind of doing the movements, but if you're not really spending time in it, then you're not getting the benefit.
Yeah. No, very well said. I mean, one of the things that we do organizationally is we get everybody around a table and we actually have the conversations. Like we'll share what the draft of the vision is. We'll share what the draft of the organization are. But then we break everybody into groups and we let them hash it out. Because it's in the hashing it out and the questioning and the curiosity and the conversations where people say, is it really this or it's this but not that? And that's when they're building their consensus of what they want to embrace and what they want to sign on to and what they want to run with and why they want to get out of bed in the morning. Yeah. So it's really important that these two worlds really, combine, I think, blend.
Yeah. Well, Susan, thank you so much.
Of course.
Such a fun book to read. And again, think about all of this in a different perspective. I appreciate that. Again, thank you so much for joining me and sharing.
Appreciate that. It's been great speaking with you today, Tyler.
Again, to repeat, as I shared in the open, so many challenges that we deal with leaders is worse because of the functional system that we have to deal with it. Well, Susan put together, and she shares in her book, the 7 key principles. I'm going to go through it right now. Be open. Go beyond your habit. Number 2, learn. Reorient your focus. Number 3, let go. Explore your edges. Get beyond it. Drop in. It's obviously a yoga term. It means just shift from doing to non-doing. Just settle. Then integrate. Live with intention. Be in the moment. Connect. Create real communication for leaders, but that's also for your body. And then illuminate. Become an inner switch leader. Those are the 7 principles. And I think when we focus on those as a system, how are you being open? What are you doing to learn? Are you just letting go? It's actually goes to my 5 R's of mindset. Then it's drop in. Just go from doing to non-doing. Just observe, watch, integrate, live with intention, connect, focus on that connection, and then illuminate. Man, I'm thankful that you're here today. I'm thankful there's conversation with Susan. I hope you got a lot from this episode. As always, you can listen to it wherever you listen on podcasts. If you want to watch on YouTube, if you subscribe to YouTube, thank you so much. There's also a lot that I shared during the week, whether it's about these episodes or just other content. And lastly, as always, invite you to be a part of the impact-driven leader community, where we have a book club, we have a roundtable, where we have a support system to help leaders through processes just like this, to be able to deal with the challenges of leading. We all need it, including myself. I've had to deal with it recently, and I'm thankful for examples such as Susan that give us the functional pathway to work through it. Sometimes we're on top of it, like she has shared, great about being in the routine of doing yoga. And other times it's knowing, I need to do more of that because that's when I'm at my best. Thanks for being here. And as always, have a good one.